Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg MACPHERSON, president of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Eco Northwest, Chevron, Girding Eland, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson & Wyatt. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. Before I introduce the program, let's take a moment to recognize the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision handed down today that affirms equal rights for all to marry. President Obama called the ruling justice that arrives like a thunderbolt. We celebrate this progress in the arc of American civil rights. Today's program is the first of several events over the next week in recognition of the 50th anniversary of Volunteers in Service to America, generally referred to by its acronym VISTA. Tomorrow, VISTA volunteers and supporters are gathering at 9 a.m. for a service project at the Oregon Food Bank. Next Tuesday, City Club and VISTA people are mixing at a special civic drinks event at Migration Brewing at 28th and Gleason. Another of the events recognizing VISTA's anniversary will be held here in this room at 1:30 today, following a short break after this program concludes at 1:15. The Executive Director of Oregon Humanities, Adam Davis, will lead a discussion about how to best address poverty, the challenges, the overall strategy, and specific tactics. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Later in our program, VELYNN Brown will facilitate a Q&A session with today's panelists and those in the live audience. Asking questions at the City Club microphone is a privilege of membership, but anyone in the audience here at the Sentinel may write a question on one of the index cards found at the center of the tables. Hold your cards up high, and City Club staff will collect them before or during the Q&A session. And now for today's program. VISTA traces its roots to President John F. Kennedy, who famously called on Americans to ask what they could do for their country. VISTA launched in 1965, 2 years after Kennedy's death, as part of the War on Poverty. VISTA has been on the front lines in the fight against poverty in America ever since. 190,000 VISTA members have served in over 4,000 communities. The City Club of Portland currently has an AMERICORPS VISTA worker, Amanda Shore, who organizes the club's Civic Scholars Program. Civic Scholars draw students from Jefferson, Roosevelt, Madison, Parkrose, and David Douglas high schools to promote civic education in those underserved parts of our community. Our panel today includes Paul Monteiro, Director of AMERICORPS Vista, who draws on his past experience in the White House Office of Public Engagement, providing outreach to various constituencies, including social safety net groups serving low-income communities. The panel also includes alums of the VISTA program. Portland's First Lady, Nancy HALES, was a VISTA worker in Yakima, Washington during the late 70s, shaping a lifelong commitment to social and economic justice. Rachel Bristol, former CEO of the Oregon Food Bank, started her career as a VISTA worker in the 1980s, addressing the causes of hunger. Her work continues to change the way people think about food and health. Our moderator, VELYNN Brown, is a VISTA alum and current VISTA supervisor at the Black Parent Initiative. Please join me in welcoming our guests to Friday Forum.
Thank you for the welcome. Good afternoon. I'm going to say a little bit more about Vista. It's a very personal connection for me, and I'm just really honored to be with you today. AmeriCorps Vista taps the skills, talents, and passion of more than 7,000 Americans annually to support community efforts to overcome poverty. Vista members work a year-long, full-time commitment to serve on specific project or nonprofit organization or public agency. They focus their efforts to build the organizational, administrative, and financial capacity of organizations that fight illiteracy, improve health services, and foster economic development. For the past 50 years, can we clap for that? 50 years, yes. Vista has proven to be one of the most cost-effective tools for building community and addressing poverty. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own personal journey with Vista. I was an eager Lewis and Clark graduate. Hey, okay. Ready to change the world, ready to put in motion the theories and the philosophies that I was so eager to make my own. And then I took a deeper look at poverty, and it was kind of overwhelming until I looked into my own backyard and my own neighborhood, and I got the invitation to be a Vista at Friends of the Children. And there I got to serve little girls that looked like me and give back to the community that gave to me. And it made sense, and it made it real that I could make a difference. And now, 20 years later, I'm still that young woman at heart, but I feel that along the way I've been able to gain a lot of wisdom that I can now mentor into my new Vista members that I have been able to build deep relationship with. So this is not just a campaign or it's not fog to me, it's real. It's how I've been able to live my life out, and I want to say thank you for that. So, all right, Paul, I would like to introduce Paul. He is the National Director of Vista, and I would like for you to discuss some of the goals for our AmeriCorps Vista program. Can you share some of the goals?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited for the conversation. I'm sure many of you expected someone much younger as a director of Vista, and that's okay. But sitting up here with some of the greatest hits of the program, I have a couple of goals for the day, but I do want to just shout out and thank the Planning Committee, the state office that's here, all the boosters and alums that are in the audience. Thank you very much for making today possible, and thank you to Greg for hosting us. I would say 3 goals, certainly. One is to celebrate. Obviously, 50 years of a federal program, that's something worth celebrating, because a lot of them don't last that long, and many of them can't point to a record of success that Vista's generated over that half of a century. So celebrating the wins we've achieved, the points we put on the board through your service. Innovating, talking about the new permutations of poverty. The world has changed since 1965, and our program has done the same to stay on the cutting edge of what does poverty look like, where is poverty today where it wasn't 50 years ago. To look at the new responses of a program that's incredibly nimble because it lives at a local level. And also to instigate. There's a lot going on. Obviously, everyone from the Pope to the President to local elected officials and thought leaders are talking about poverty. They're talking about why in the world things are the way they are, structural issues, lack of equality of opportunity. There's actually a table in the back for those of you that run organizations that may want to consider getting in the game with AmeriCorps Vista or serving. Please see the table in the back for more information. So celebrating, innovating, and instigating. Those are my 3 goals for today. And I'm so happy to have the mayor and the first lady in the audience and on the panel today. It's just a real pleasure for us to have you. And just the last thing I'll say is, being from Washington, D.C., a lot of times folks live in the fake argument space where, on the one hand, folks say, government shouldn't be in this work. Let the private sector, let the charitable sector, let the nonprofit or the faith-based sector get this done, because they'll do it on their own. And there are others on the other side who say, well, no, government, put more money into government, and government will figure it out if you just fund it at the right levels. And Vista, I think, gives the lie to sort of the one or the other. For 50 years, you've shown how, certainly a federal investment, but with local solutions, local people figuring out the answers to local problems. It's a both-and sort of thing. And we have 50 years of examples to show how you don't pick one or the other. It's a partnership. So I'm just glad to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to give a little bit more specifics to that local influence you were talking about. Vista members here in Oregon, 100 Vista members raised over $2.8 million in cash and in-kind resources and mobilized 15,476 community volunteers who serve more than 97,000 hours in our local communities right here. So let's clap that up. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Can I chime in on that?
Yes.
Can I chime in? That's fiscal 14, just last year, and across the country. Show me another program, federal or otherwise, where fewer than 8,000 people mobilized more than 1 million volunteers, a program with a $94 million budget that generated $201 million in cash and in-kind in a single year. That's what you do, and that's worth celebrating.
All right. Nancy and Rachel, we want to invite you into this conversation. These women both have served as Vistas. Can you tell us first, Nancy, about how your experience shaped you in your career?
Well, thank you. Hi, would you like me to introduce myself?
Yes,
So my name is Nancy Hales, and yes, I am your First Lady, and this is probably the only time I will ever be able to introduce the mayor as my husband. So I'd like to introduce my husband, who is so good to support me today. Thank you. Thank you, honey. And I am a proud Vista alum. My Vista experience was in the 1970s, and that's actually way before your time, Paul. Vista and Peace Corps were the same program. So Vista was considered domestic Peace Corps, and when I sort of stepped into the same place that you did and said, I really want to take my education and turn it into something that's meaningful to me, I had two choices. I had Sierra Leone or Yakima, Washington. And same thing, right? Sierra Leone was going through a civil war, so they were pulling Vistas actually, or Peace Corps volunteers out of that and putting them domestically. So I was sent to Yakima, Washington, and my job description had 2 words: build program. I mean, that was it, 2 words. And I'm sure that's changed in the 50 years, or 40 years now. But for me, that was both very frightening and also very liberating. And I was setting up camp at a local community center in an area that had had tremendous strife, terrible poverty. And within the first month of my entrance to Yakima, Washington, the city of Yakima had received a very large federal grant called UDAG, Urban Development Action Grant. And those of us in the room that remember those days, remember those were to really address, allegedly to address blight. And our city had applied for and received this large grant to do an expansion of its industrial base into this area that was allegedly blight, create allegedly jobs, and in fact displace probably the only single-family owned African-American community in the city. So very early for me, my work of building program at a community center for young people became much bigger than that. And I think for those of us, and there are a number of Vistas here in the room, you may not get clear direction. I don't know that any of us ever really gets clear direction with our first job description. But it was so apparent to us that the much bigger issue in the room wasn't creating program in the community center. It was helping citizens reclaim their dignity. And I have to say, mobilizing citizens at that point in time to come to a public meeting to oppose something that would ultimately turn them from landowners to renters, this was before cell phones. I mean, it was before Facebook invites. It was before copiers. It was before copiers. And we had mimeograph machines. Do you remember those things that you do? Da-da-da-da? Yes, we do. We remember. And they smelled like, you know, paint, and they were probably very toxic. But we made 400 flyers, my fellow Vista and I drew this picture of a bulldozer with a house in its bucket, and I wrote on the side of it, UDAG, is this what you want? And we placarded the entire neighborhood. We packed the one planning meeting that the city had decided to host, and we stopped the project. And that was this wonderful, wonderful success. But what do you do with that? What we learned very early on then was that our work as Vista volunteers wasn't really to stop things, it was really to help people empower themselves to take advantage of what they need in their own community. So I spent the next year and a half actually as a grassroots community organizer, and with that victory, then we took on a number of others that were very much part of what we feel was part of the inequality in our community, Yakima, Washington. So did that shape me? Oh goodness, yes, and I still have that fire in my belly, and by gosh, my husband knows it. But it's such, for me it was not, I think I went into it being as sort of a deferred of my career. In fact, what it did was galvanize my career. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Rachel, can you share a little bit about your Vista experience with us?
I can. Excuse me, these chairs are not made for short people. I can feel my legs. My experience started in the early 80s when, after 8 years, I'd finally worked my way through school to a degree in community development and public administration from the University of Oregon. Unfortunately, by the time I graduated, we were in the depths of a major recession with 12.2% unemployment. It was the first real wave of huge losses in our natural resource-based industries, manufacturing jobs. Much of our population left the state in search of work, but still those that were here, over 12%, unemployed. I ended up in Portland and learned about a newly formed nonprofit organization called Oregon Food Share, who had a mission of creating a statewide emergency food system. There was also a local bank, food bank at that time called Portland Interagency Food Bank. We operated from the 5th floor of the Governor Building down at the foot of the Morrison Bridge. There were an executive director, an administrative assistant, and 2 half-time people working to solicit food and funds. And they gave me the job of getting free everything and figuring out how we were going to get it around the state. What attracted me to the position was how well it fit with my values about not letting things waste. Part of what I'd done during my getting through school years was develop recycling programs, did public policy work on things like Equal Rights Amendment. Wow, that still hasn't gotten through, has it? So here was an opportunity to help people share what was available but was currently going into landfills, billions and billions of pounds of good food. Also at that time, as a Christmas gift to the poor, President Reagan began releasing surplus commodities, huge quantities of, in the early days, cheese primarily, powdered milk. It was actually, much of it was stored in caves in part of the country. I still have a hard time believing that, but they tell me it's true. So, but there was really no funding for the program, there was just free food. So we had to figure out how to get it to people. And I should say that I was placed in the statewide office, but I was one of 14 Vista volunteers that were placed around the state to create regional food banks. So we were all working in our communities to find free food, free transportation, free cold storage, free dry storage, because there was no money. And then all of a sudden, there's 10 truckloads of cheese coming in, and the state says, Rachel, where do you want it? And they would deliver to one point in the state. As most of you know, most of our population is in the Willamette Valley. And there were some areas that couldn't take a whole truckload of cheese. So anyway, by hook and by crook, we figured out how to do it while also distributing seeds that required us to get hundreds of volunteers in order to hand out vegetable seeds to people who were hungry so they could grow some of their own food. We had to take a magic marker and put a big X over every single package. We did that out at the Port of Portland. My first experience with the mayor's office was when 4 truckloads of powdered milk showed up at terminal number 1. And the mayor's office called and said, aren't you the guys who distribute this food? Well, you learn a lot about the whole industry. So 3 of us, me and 2 guys, got in my VW Squareback, drove out to the port. Sure enough, there's 4 truckloads of powdered milk, 40-pound boxes, stacked to the ceiling, and they were on slip sheets. That means you needed a special machine to pull them out of the truck. You couldn't get them with a forklift, which meant we had to hand unload 4 truckloads of powdered milk. And finally, a fellow at the port who drove the forklift had mercy on us and started bringing us pallets to stack it on and taught us how to stack the pallet so the milk wouldn't fall over when you picked it up. So it was a wild ride, but it was about creating, and most of all, creating community, because there was no money. It was all volunteer effort virtually. And it was also a wonderful opportunity to create a system that was equitable as it could be around the state. By having the Vista volunteers placed around the state, we began getting together to say, okay, you've got a lot of potatoes down in Klamath Falls, you got a lot of onions on Ontario, you got a lot of corn in the valley. Nobody can live on corn or onions or potatoes alone. So how do we share this stuff? And so that we readily agreed that if you were hungry, no matter whether you lived in Portland or Coos Bay or Burns, that you should have access to a similar quantity and variety of food. And that's what we did. And eventually, when my Vista service ended, I was asked to supervise the next round of Vista volunteers, so it continued. And a year after that, or a couple years after that, Oregon Food Share merged with Portland Interagency Food Bank, and I happened to be the acting executive director because there wasn't hardly anybody else there, to create Oregon Food Bank, which most people have heard of by now. Which went on to become a national model of food banks in the country, not only for its unique food distribution system, but probably what I'm more proud of is having the largest public policy staff of any food bank in the country that achieved a lot of success in fighting for things like free school breakfast, the earned income tax credit, increasing the minimum wage, even though that wasn't very popular with some of our donors. And all of that started from an opportunity provided by Vista. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think some of the common themes that also Paul set up for us is being innovative. In each of your experiences, and even in my own, oftentimes we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And so we get that VAD, or we get that description, that job description, and we parallel what our community looks like. And we began to serve. At the core of Vista's service. But it's amazing how it continues to just snowball and the impact that we can make. So we salute you both today. Thank you. Paul, can you talk a little bit more about national efforts being made? Vista it developed because of the war, attacking the war on poverty. Can you talk a little bit more about policies nationally that are in effect now?
Sure, and I see Vista as one of the tools in the federal toolbox. And the president, as was mentioned, I started at the White House at the beginning of the first term and served there for 5 years, and seeing the president push so hard to get the Affordable Care Act through. Thank God it's constitutional with the subsidies yesterday. Yeah, I was applauding yesterday. And when that was going through, a lot of folks were criticizing him for, why are you spending time on this? You need to focus on the economy. Sort of failing to recognize that the Affordable Care Act and the lack of insurance or affordable insurance for millions of Americans was certainly an economic issue. Folks going into bankruptcy, not able to deal with treatable conditions that would turn into life-threatening conditions. So certainly on the healthcare push, the work he's done around establishing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, making some controls against this payday lending industry, the shadow banking economy. I was just in Memphis seeing how Vista's 25% of the population of Memphis, no bank account. So they use the payday lending, liquor store, check cashing economy. So Vistas are serving to get every bank in the city to come together to create different types of bank accounts that are easier on fees, less draconian on penalties, prepaid cards as opposed to credit cards. The work the president did to set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the work he's done around child hunger, along with the First Lady, making sure that we're protecting investments in SNAP. We're not criminalizing people that are doing everything they can but don't have enough to eat. The work he's done with establishing promise zones, federal designation that says in these particularly distressed areas, we're going to have an all-of-government response, including 5 Vistas in every promise zone, to work on building a system of support to get that community to improve. I see Vista as one of the tools in the federal response to poverty, including My Brother's Keeper is, I think, one of the latest examples, knowing that life outcomes for young men and boys in particular communities are tragic when it comes to third grade literacy, when it comes to ex-offender reentry, when it comes to high school completion into secondary school or vocational education, crisis levels. And Vista's serving in all of these things I just ticked off. There are Vista projects that are also working in those spaces day to day. As folks, I think, talk about the policy issues, it's so gratifying to see there are probably several Vistas actually working day in, day out to actually attack the problem. So I see Vista in that sense of one of the many federal tools to work with the local community to attack poverty.
Thank you. Nancy, can you tell us why we should encourage Vistas to continue to serve with poverty, right? We've been in this work for a long time, and a lot has changed and a lot remains the same. How do we keep student leaders, how do we pass the torch on to the next generations to continue the work that we've begun?
Wow, what a question. Okay, I'm on. So I was remiss. We have another elected leader in the room, and I would like to ask Commissioner Steve Novick to please stand. Thank you for being here. And I'm not sure, okay, Bill, you're nodding at somebody else. I can't see who else is back there. Sam Chase, Metro Councilor Sam Chase is in the room. Thank you, Sam. Who else are we missing? And it's important, by the way, because in my Vista experience, I mean, I was fighting leaders. Fortunately, in this city, I think you can work with leaders, and that's a big change, I think, from the 70s even to today. And maybe some of us don't always agree with our leaders, but the systems that we were putting in place in Yakima, Washington, that allowed access access to the very decisions that were being affecting over your life didn't exist. I mean, we didn't have a Senate Bill 100 that had a public policy mandate or public involvement mandate. So we're very fortunate, I think. And yes, we're excited that Obamacare, and I'm happy to call it Obamacare, is law of the land. And I think that does, in fact, address poverty at a level that is ubiquitous and universal, and yay. And this is a wonderful, exciting time, I think, for our country. I think maybe most of you in the room know my husband and I have been invited to actually go to the Vatican next month, because even the world, even the Pope, who is, you know, arguably one of the strongest world leaders today, has said that climate change and the environment is inextricably linked to poverty. And the only way to address poverty and the only way to address climate change is if they're addressed together. So those, to me, are very, very positive signs. So what's the role of a Vista volunteer when you look at that kind of landscape that we all have? You know, VELYNN, you and I talked about this a little before we got up here. The metrics in where we stand in poverty are very difficult to measure. Matter of fact, I'm a college teacher, so I can't help myself. In preparation for this, I did Google war on poverty, where are we? And in fact, in 2014, President Obama actually had the Council of Economic Advisors release a report called The War on Poverty 50 Years Later, How Are We Doing? And the report basically says, well, we've made a dent in it, but we don't always agree on the metrics, and we're not really sure on how we're measuring this versus that, and that was those years, and this is this year. So what does that tell us? I don't know. That's not particularly helpful for me. So if I were a citizen or a young person or somebody that said, I want to live my passion, I want to understand where I can make a difference, I don't know that I would use the metric of where I'm going to move the bar on poverty. But let me share with you where you can move the bar. In empowering citizens in a community where you live or a community that needs you. That's probably secondary. But the most okay, thank you. The most important thing I think for us we learned is people need access to the day-to-day choices that are affecting their lives. And the more we can help people either be educated in how to participate in those processes, or how to advocate for themselves, or how to insist that they get what I feel the fair shake, to me, that's moving the bar. And the second thing, and I think that this is even more perhaps personal, Vista volunteers get to experiment with their own voice, and I certainly did as 22 years old. And you know, I have a table of Vista volunteers. Yay, would you all stand? Let's just give you a big giant shout out. Thank you. Matter of fact, okay. You know, point of privilege. Where are the Vista volunteers in the room? I mean, this room is replete with young people. Okay, please stand. All of you, stand. Okay, City Club, pay attention. Okay, for people who are listening to this in OPB or land, wherever you are, half of the room just stood up, and this is a room of 300 people. So half of the room is filled with young, earnest Vista volunteers who are saying, I intend to make a difference in my community, and my hat is off to you. So I think you guys are the one to answer that question, and I think in our forum following, we're going to take that on. So thank you so much.
Okay, Rachel, in your experience, how do you see poverty? How has poverty changed since Vista was created, and where do you think it's headed?
In many ways, I think that there wasn't as much poverty in the early days. What we saw was people who flowed in and out temporarily in need of support. Over the years, as the job market changed, health coverage changed, we began seeing more people going to get emergency food boxes because of healthcare costs. That one family emergency, wiped people out. Part of the problem, frankly, is how we define poverty is such a ridiculous level in terms of to think that anybody who's $4 a year or a month over the poverty level they got all their needs met. I mean, that's not true. We continued to we went from seeing people coming to our network because of unemployment, and then we began seeing more and more working poor. People that made just enough, they didn't qualify for food stamps or any kind of subsidy, but as rents were going up and costs were going up, food was the discretionary item. There wasn't a bill collector for the food. It was how we always used to describe it. They don't turn off your utilities if you don't have enough food. That didn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. And then we began seeing more seniors. And before I retired from the food bank in almost 3 years ago exactly, we saw a major shift of people who used to be our donors, realtors, people who had good incomes that were far from poverty, but still didn't have a lot of cushion. And as that recession wore on, they would call us up, and they would call in tears. It's like, I've always supported this organization, but now I need help, and I don't know where to go. And I think that's still happening. And to me, it's poverty. If people can't have decent shelter over their head, heat in the winter, cool in the summer, and good nutrition. We hurt our own communities and our ability to be successful if we don't ensure that living wages are helping people to be active participants in their communities. Hopefully I answered your question.
Can you also, Rachel, tell us more about your current work at the Moore Institute? Would you like to do that?
Yeah, well, about a week before my retirement, folks at OHSU Moore Institute for Nutrition and Wellness asked me to volunteer chair a new committee to create a statewide nutrition consortium. I guess they figure I knew something about organizing on a statewide basis. But it's a challenge. The Moore Institute is supported by Bob and Charlie Moore of Bob's Red Mill. The long-term gift is out in the future, and so once again, we're trying to create an organization primarily with volunteer efforts. What the research that led the Moores to create this institute at OHSU is the discovery of the genetic links between the diet in your grandmother, your mother, you as a mother, and you as a kid in the first years of life, and the onset of various diseases. They've directly linked poor nutrition to diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, and they're discovering more every day. And so what the Moores wanted the Institute to do was to get this information out there in the hands of people so that we can turn the tide on things like obesity and heart disease and all the things that are driving our high healthcare costs, and that we can ensure that within a generation is our hope that the population is getting healthier instead of getting sicker. And so we're trying to bring together dietitians, nutritionists, people working in food security programs, gardening, anyone who is working with particularly adolescent girls and women through the reproductive years, but also kids and their families, to bring the message of it's not just about how you look, and you know, it's really about how long your grandchild is likely to live if we don't get on top of the poor nutrition that's represented by the American diet.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul, can you share with us some of the barriers to service for potential VISTA candidates?
Sure. I think, again, Vista is built on the Peace Corps model, and part of that construction is, for a long time, there was a policy that if you had an outside job, we would terminate you. You were supposed to live on the living stipend, not supplement that income in any way, so that you could live in solidarity with the low-income community you're serving with. I think as a academic idea, I think I can see the appeal of that. And, practically, though, what we found more often than not was happening was that you were pricing out people that didn't have family connections or other wealth to tap into to supplement what we were paying them. So while we would fire someone if we found they were working at a pizzeria in the evenings, on the weekends, any of their free time, our policy was silent on what we knew was happening, where families were supplementing our stipend, and we ignored it. So as of May 3rd, we changed the policy because, for example, we got a letter, every Vista sponsor in Minnesota signed a letter saying, we try to recruit from this low-income community where we're serving in. Our organizations are housed in these under-resourced areas. When we get to that policy, they drop out. They cannot survive on that because they have no cushion. I was sharing with the Vistas this morning, there's a reason every Vista in Alaska is not from Alaska. The stipend is here. The cost of living in Alaska is here. And so effectively, you have to pay us to serve as a Vista in Alaska. And that's not the only state. And to have this transformative experience, I mean, you have 3 great examples right up here of how Vista Service put them on a pathway where they never stopped serving. They're still serving. But denying that because we had that policy, we took that away as of May 3rd, and we're looking to see how the numbers change in terms of who can actually see this as a realistic option for them. I was in Baltimore last week. We launched a project focused on returning citizens, folks who have made a mistake, done their time, coming back into society. As much as Baltimore has been in the news, I'm a little frustrated why anyone's surprised. If you paid attention to Baltimore in the last 30, 40 years, why are you surprised? The lack of opportunity, the lack of resources, the lack of any institutions have been there, and there are many cities that look like Baltimore. But getting them, the folks who were applying to serve as Vistas through our background check process is tough. But as you say, you want to be open to everyone. You want to let people serve. Where I find if you're working with ex-offenders or folks that have relatives in the system, sometimes the most credible people are folks who know what they're talking about because they've been on that pathway and they know where it leads. When I was at the White House, we'd often have programs around fatherhood and ex-offenders who were trying to reconnect with their families, and you would invite them because of their story, but they couldn't get in. So I think structures like that unintentionally tell people no, where on the other side we're telling them, please take a look at us. And I think another barrier is just the general lack of visibility, where we have a lot of work to do to raise the profile of this wonderful program that transforms lives individually and of whole communities, builds structures that, you know, we had a study in 2010, 82% of all Vista projects sustainable 3 years after the Vistas leave. So they're building systems that endure after the Vista commitment ends. So looking internally to see what are we doing to keep people away, to really broaden who can serve in this program and raise the profile to get more folks to know exactly what magic Vistas sort of do when they're serving.
Thank you,
So
Paul.
I have to weigh in. I had no idea you even had that policy. So and maybe because, well, that you couldn't have outside work. And again, we were way out in Yakima, so nobody was paying attention to us anyway. But we were all really broke, and this is what we would do to make a go of things. Does anyone play backgammon still? I don't even know if people know how to play. Okay, yay, Sam. So there is, we're dating ourselves. So there's this bar in Yakima, Washington called the Bushwhacker, and they had backgammon tables, and we would play for food. And we gambled for dinner. And it's like, so I have to say, Vista, and I know Concordia's here somewhere. Where's Concordia? I met with Scott. Okay, so Scott, I know you're back there somewhere. Scott and I had this conversation about how you stretch the dollar as a Vista volunteer, and Scott was a Vista volunteer for a couple years, and that was really part of it. It's this sort of reaching inside yourself and really trying to be resourceful. And we did all kinds of crazy things. It's a good thing we didn't have rules because we all would have been kicked out, I'm sure. But I think that's another lesson as a program, that you can sort of reach inside yourself and be resourceful, and you really do want to be in a place where you are, truly empathetic and part of the community that you're serving. And that to me was part of it. I didn't want the experience as a position from privilege. I really did want an experience that was very much part of the community that I was serving. So. Again, I think especially for those of you who are considering Vista, it's, you want to go through that. You really want to go through that as part of your experience in your life, so.
Absolutely, and the policy changed. It wasn't directed for all Vistas, and what we're finding already in the few months that it's been changed, slightly over 100 folks have applied to have an outside job. Most Vistas, you're not getting paid a ton, but you've learned to live on it. The policy was really for those folks, and I would meet them, unfortunately. They would say, I'm having a great time, my project's putting me forward as a sort of rock star Vista, but next week's my last week because I can't make it add up anymore. Or the folks that were coming through the recruitment pipeline, that you almost got them, and then they would run into that, but I need to have a little bit extra. So what we're finding is Vistas are, making it work on the stipend for the most part, and they're tired because they're given everything they have for, during their project assignment. So we're finding the uptake on this policy change is really very targeted for the folks that we don't want to lose, whether it's in the recruitment pipeline or while they're in service.
Thank you. We just have like 1 or 2 more minutes for the panel. Is there any last minute wrap-up comments, 1 sentence or so that you'd like to share before we open up?
I would agree with Paul's comment, and in fact, I got to meet him in Washington, D.C. last month, and when a colleague who also started as a Vista volunteer in the 80s and who went on to work with AMERICORPS and Vista over the years in doing all kinds of community development projects around food systems. Her reaction was, oh yay, somebody finally remembered Vista. So I would say what you can help do is spread the word about the opportunity. I agree it's probably more challenging in today's world with different expectations, particularly related to, what is it, the whole techie stuff, the being tuned in, and you know what I mean. You see, I grew up back in the mimeograph days, like Nancy. And so, you really can survive on the stipend, but you might not be living like your buddies who are in college and, being supported to live in the dorm or whatever. And that's okay, I think that we need to create more opportunities for people to be in community with real people, not a screen.
Okay, I have one more comment and then I'll shut up. And I say this to Vista volunteers, and I say this to everyone who will listen. You know, when you're putting together sort of your resume, who are you? What have you done? Where have you worked? And you list all those things, and they say we'll have 15 careers in our lifetime, and I probably had close to that. I always include Vista, and I actually put it first, because I think Vista isn't sort of a list of credentials of things that you've done with your life. It's about who you are as a person. And people need to know that it's not about what you've done, it's about who you are. And so it's really been, and I know we all feel that way, we encourage you to seek us afterwards if you're interested. I mean, I'm happy to talk about our programs with anyone. And thank you so much, City Club, for giving us this platform to share our story. So, yeah. Paul?
Well, I would just say I'm excited about where we are as a program. Again, Vistas are doing some cutting-edge stuff based on what the need is, whether it's New Americans, whether it's My Brother's Keeper, whether it's this shadow banking economy that low-income people are trapped in, healthy futures, access to food. So I'm really excited to see the great programming Vistas come up with on a regular basis to attack relevant needs, and rolling out some new ones. We're announcing soon a new project focused on performance measurement, because a lot of folks, they want to hear good anecdotes, but they want to see metrics. They want to see performance measures. And a lot of these nonprofits have very little capacity to tell their story in those terms. That's just a need that wasn't around in 1965, but it's around today, and it's not going away. So I'm excited about where we are. It's a great pipeline of public service for those serving. For those of you considering serving, Vistas, along with Peace Corps, were the only programs with non-competitive eligibility. And what that means is, for the purposes of federal hiring, you're considered a federal employee. So many times Vistas will go into federal service after their term of service ends. And just a thank you to Mayor Hales and First Lady Hales for the support. This is rare to have just this high level of cheerleading going on in a city, and I think a lot of the success we've seen across the country is where leaders like the Mayor and the First Lady step up and say they value national service. So just a thank you to both of you for your leadership.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to open up for question and answer right now. If you have written a question on the index card, please hold it up high so that the City Club staff can collect it from you. We have any questions? Oh. And we will now take those questions. Are they going to come to me, or we're going to? We have one right there.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Justin Gottlieb. I'm a dues-paying City Club member and friend of the mayor's office. I've spent the last 6 weeks traveling the most impoverished areas of the state, living among the folks, and have invited everyone to Salem on July 1st to discuss the poor, hungry, and homeless. Then we're all going to share a bowl. I would remind you that it is just one thing to, I lost my train of thought. It's one thing to give money to organizations to conquer the homeless problem. It's an entirely different thing to have them show up on your doorstep. Couldn't you please comment on what homeless folks should do when they knock on friends and families' doors and friends and families are appalled at their current state? Thank you.
Who would like to take that question?
Well, I can simply say for Vista and some of our larger projects focused on serving the homeless, we actually have Vistas that were formerly homeless that are actually serving as Vistas. And going back to the sort of experiential knowledge issue of, you know exactly what you're talking about as you work with folks who are in a situation you were in. So it's certainly an area where Vista's programming is strong, and it's not easy, but that's usually where you find Vistas, on the bleeding edges of a lot of these really challenging problems.
Bill Dickey.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Bill Dickey, City Club member. Explain to me where the budget for Vista comes from in the federal budget. Is that something that is in the budgeting process, has to be fought for every year, or is it in the executive budget? I'm just educate me on that.
Sure, thanks for the question. So AmeriCorps Vista is housed at the federal agency called the Corporation for National and Community Service. So it's federally funded. Congress controls our appropriation. Going through right now a moment where the House and the Senate are going through their markup this week. The House has proposed eliminating other AmeriCorps programs, the NCCC and the Social Innovation Fund. They've left Vista's budget intact, but there are impacts on us. So it's a congressionally funded program, but we are growing through public-private partnerships, our largest being with the Citibank Foundation, about $10 million to fund a core of Vista's focus on financial literacy. We also have a partnership with the Bank of America Foundation. We just announced in February a partnership with Google and the Boys and Girls Club, helping low-income kids learn how to code. So we're seeing a lot of the growth from these public-private partnerships. Our funding is pretty flat at the moment.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Bowling. I'm a City Club member, and I'm also a Vista volunteer.
Oh, thank you.
Well, hold up a minute. In fact, I'm probably the only one here who was in the original Vista group. I joined Vista in 1965. And but my story is not going to go quite the way you expect. I'm from Portland. I went to Chicago. We worked in an area called Uptown. We worked with Appalachian community. We followed the methods of Saul Alinsky, and were very active in serious organizing. I was a young man, and I was finding my way, and I, in fact, was trying to find out who I was, and I, in fact, I'll also say I was not sexually active, but somewhere in the process of my early Vista career, the administration of that program found that I was gay, or began to think I was gay. And one day I was asked to come into the director's office, and this is what he said to me. He said, "I have nothing against homosexuals, but you should go home." Now, I have great respect for Vista, and I'm not trying to knock it down, but I think there's a certain point where historical reality is an important thing to bring up too. Thank you.
So thank you for that comment. And yes, there's been 50 years of change, and that's happily something I'm assuming has been changed.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that would never happen today.
Today. Yeah. So and yay Supreme Court, okay? And yay. So that will not happen in any federal program ever.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Following up on Bill's experience 50 years ago in Vista, Paul, this is a question for you. Does Vista track its volunteers afterwards? Is there a Vista Alumni Association? Do you have statistics on what Vista volunteers have gone on to do? Do you track them?
Yes, but not in a wholly systematic way. And that's something, when I came in last year, we made a priority because, again, like these exemplars up here, and you included, when you look at what Vistas go on to do, it's funny, I was at the White House for 5 years, and I worked with anti-poverty groups and social safety net sort of providers. So some of the biggest nonprofits and medium-sized nonprofits in the country. And when I sent a note saying, you know, I'm leaving this job, I'm going over to Vista, so many of them wrote back saying, I work here now because I was a Vista. And these are folks sort of more seasoned toward the end of their career. They go on to start their own organizations or work in major organizations helping people. And I think that's a huge loss if we don't have not only a strategic, comprehensive way to track our alumni, but also a well-thought-through set of asks. Because even if we were talking about this earlier today, even if I have your phone number, your email, I know where you served, what am I asking you to do? And it better not just be, can you give me $10 or, you know, donate. So we're trying to get to a place, we had a reorganization and built a marketing and outreach and alumni team in headquarters, whose job it is to wake up every day and build a system to reconnect with alumni, help them reconnect with others, and also use alumni to pour into currently serving members. I think that's a real sort of point that we're not hitting the mark on yet. So we have a robust database. It's growing through a lot of these anniversary events. The anniversary is a great organizing tool. But that's certainly an area where we've made a priority and actually have a team focused on that. Thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm Leslie Zenner, and I'm a City Club member. So my question is, in regards to volunteers and the couple-year commitment on a stipend, with so many of our current graduates carrying heavy student loan debt, there's a 6-month grace period before they have to start repayments as part of a government agency affiliation. Is there a potential or some kind of opportunity so that post-college graduates could come and volunteer for that year or two without that pressure of, getting right into that career path and trying to get on top of those loans? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we're looking, this is also a topic we touched on this morning in the Vista session, looking at pushing universities and colleges to match the education award, which is a huge benefit. Obviously, for those that don't know, you serve a term, you're eligible for the Siegel Education Award, which tracks the Pell Grant, so $5,600, $5,700. And getting universities to say, we'll match that. We'll basically double the award that the corporation's giving you when it comes to paying off debt or going back to pursue another degree. And it's not uncommon for me to meet Vistas that are saying, I'm re-upping because I want to get another ed award or pay off some debt that's holding me back. I mean, this issue of college debt, you're seeing that in many ways it's changing behaviors in terms of delaying purchasing a home, impacting credit scores, all sorts of life decisions sort of pushed back because of the crippling debt in many cases. So we've been really going after that front. And then there are some colleges and universities that sort of are weaving it into their program where it's sort of you get some degree of forgiveness. If you do your coursework and a year of service, you get your degree and some degree of relief. But most of the activity I've seen has been around the matching of the Ed Award.
Greg Wallinger, City Club member and Vista alum. Paul, this question is for you. City Club's getting ready for our big centennial celebration next year, and so we've been thinking a lot about what the next 100 years look like. My question for you is, what are you most excited about in the next 50 years of Vista?
That's a great question, and that's to buy time to think of a good answer to it. I think in terms of what I'm most excited about, I think because Vista is, again, that perfect marriage of, the federal support but local solutions. Like, there is no blueprint in my office of what needs to be done in Portland. I don't know, the community knows. So what I'm most excited about is, as was said at the beginning, when Head Start was, created, it was Vistas that were some of the first sort of implementers of Head Start, getting access to low-income kids to get them set on a right track. I'm looking at what are you all going to come up with next? Knowing the permutations of poverty are different, whether it's this shadow banking issue or the refugee issue or this trafficking in persons issue or this lack of access to food. I think Vistas are going to come up with some of the most creative programming that we can brag about because they address relevant needs. We're not stuck in 1965. Even the performance measurement project I talked about, like, that just wasn't a need in 1965. And we can really lead the way, and folks can point back and say, you saw a local problem, and you came up with a local solution with local people. So I hope it's not a perfect answer to your question, but thanks for asking.
We've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. Remember, we'll take a short break and resume here for the live audience at 1:30 for a discussion with Adam Davis. As we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to today's panelists.